Hello, I'm Gwen Hill from Pine Ridge Baptist Church Sunday School Department Ladies Class, and we are studying today the 23rd chapter of Exodus. We are continuing at Mount Sinai. God is continuing to give Moses a list of laws. If you'll remember back in chapter 20, he gave the 10 Commandments, which is it for each individual life, the way that we can live our life and be successful at it. Now we are getting the laws that a nation needs, a society needs, for individuals who break the 10 Commandments and how to handle that and the nuances of that. This would be case law studies so that the judges would know how to rule in God's approval. So, Exodus 23, verses 1 through 5. Do not spread false reports. Do not help a guilty person by being a malicious witness. Do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. When you give testimony in a lawsuit, do not pervert justice by siding with the crowd. Do not show favoritism to a poor person in a lawsuit. If you come across your enemy's ox or donkey wandering off, be sure to return it. If you see the donkey of someone that hates you fallen down under its load, do not leave it there. Be sure that you help them with it. Quite a lot in that. It's laws of justice and laws of mercy. God has a real hard time with us when we fail to tell the truth. You will see a theme going throughout the Bible that lying is not advantageous at any time. God says don't spread false reports. Stay to the truth. The only way to obey this command, even if you hear something and you know it's false, you do not repeat it. You do not spread it. Don't follow the crowd in doing wrong. Just do your own thing. Do not follow others. Think through what's happening. Make sure that what you're doing is what God would have you do. And especially in a lawsuit, don't pervert justice by being untruthful. You know, it's sad, but following the crowd oftentimes leads us where we really don't want to go. Adam followed Eve, took him where he didn't want to go. And then I think of the crowd right before Jesus, or as he was standing with Pilate. The crowd is not a good influencer most of the time. People's emotions get ahead of their head. So we need to be careful of that. And if you're a judge, you need to make sure you're looking at something very strictly and strong, and that you don't show favoritism to people at all. That's why the old adage of justice should be blind is a truthful adage. Justice shouldn't look at you on the outside and judge what you did or didn't do by your financial status, by the way you're standing in front of them. It needs to be an honest critique. The last two verses that I read to you about if you've come across your enemy's ox or donkey wandering off, you may think, well, I live in a society where that doesn't happen very often. There's other things that you and a person that you don't really get along with too much, that maybe you find their pup, their dog has wandered away. You can return it to them. All kinds of things. Something as simple as a newspaper got delivered to the wrong mailbox. You can return it. Doing so may win you a friend instead of an enemy. Verse 5, where it talks about the donkey with a heavy load and falling under a heavy load, can be your neighbor. It can be a member of your own household that's got more than they can handle. offer to help. Offer to help them up, even if it's someone that you've not got along with before. If there's something that you can do to help your neighbor, do it. That's what God would have us do. Verse 6 through 9. Do not deny justice to your poor people in their lawsuits. Have nothing to do with a false charge, and do not put an innocent or honest person to death, for I will not acquit the guilty. Do not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds those who see and twist the words of the innocent. Do not oppress a foreigner. You yourselves know how it feels to be foreigners, because you were foreigners in Egypt. This is a way to get along and have justice in your society. Don't deny justice to poor people in their lawsuits. Don't take advantage of someone because they're not as learned as you are, or as wealthy as you are, or as blessed as you are. Have nothing to do with false charges. And if you know if something is false, speak up. Don't allow a lie to go unchallenged if you know it to be a lie. Do not oppress a foreigner. He reminds them that they spent many years in Egypt as slaves and as foreigners, and how frightening that was at times to have no control. Treat other people that way. At some times in our lives, we're all foreigners. Are there people in your church or in your class at school or in your workplace that are fairly new? Have you made an opportunity to speak to them? Have you made an opportunity to have them feel welcome, to offer your assistance, to buy a cup of coffee, to share with them? Have you isolated them? Do you remember how it felt when you were new? We're going into the Sabbath laws now. I spoke to you once before, or maybe even twice before, about the 6-to-1 rule that God initiated. Work 6 days and rest on the seventh. We're going to take that a little bit further. And God takes this very seriously. We can read this and think it didn't mean much, but yes, it did. It meant a lot. For 6 years you are to sow your fields and harvest the crops. But during the 7th year, let the land lie unplowed and unused. Then the poor among your people may get food from it, and wild animals may eat what is left. Do the same with your vineyard and with your olive grove. This allows the land to rest. You know, in this day and time, they had no Lowe's or Home Depot to go to get fertilizer. They needed to let the land rest. And God commanded them to work the land for 6 years, and during the 7th year to let it lay fallow. If you knew that you were going to have to let your land lay fallow the 7th year, wouldn't you know to prepare for that year? To put extra away, to preserve more food, to prepare yourself for that? And you're also going to need to trust the Lord. That's what it all boils down to, trusting the Lord to take care of you. This land lying fallow at that 7th year, there's still going to be some crops spring up. There's still going to be some bounty. There's still going to be things on the trees for the poor people who didn't have very much to start with, for them to gather and to glean. In verse 12, he says, 6 days do your work, but the 7th day don't work, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, and so that the slave born in your household and the foreigner living among you may be refreshed. In our culture, in our day, we're a go, go, go. And a lot of times, men and women work around the clock. They work 7 days a week. And then they're exhausted, and they have a poor attitude, and it's all because of lack of rest. God recognizes that He made the human body in such a way that it needs to recover. It needs to recuperate after a time of work. He has designed us to work, to strive, and then to rest. And He says, not only you, but the people that you work with and the people that work for you. Even the stranger. You need to rest one day a week. Do you know this was so foreign to the peoples that lived around the Israelis that the Romans thought that the Hebrew children, later it's recorded, that they thought they were extremely lazy because they wouldn't work 7 days a week. It's a new world to these people, and God is sharing with them how to have this new nation, a nation of His design. He says on verse 13, "Be careful to do everything I have said to you. Do not invoke the names of other gods. Do not let them be heard on your lips." I don't want to hear you speak the name of any of the heathen gods. Not even in jest, not even in play, not even as a byword. I want their names out of your vocabulary. You are my people. I am your God. And I am a jealous God, and I'm not going to entertain. I'm not going to look over you talking about or of other gods. I will not have you in idolatry. It's really hard for these people because that's where they came from. So much idolatry was practiced around them. That's what they know. That's what they've seen. And God says, you got to learn differently. I'm going to teach you. He says, first of all, there's 3 things you're going to do for me. He said, you're going to get 3 annual festivals. You know, Jesus would have observed all 3 of these when he was walking the earth during the times of the New Testament. In verse 14, 3 times a year you are to celebrate a festival to me. 15 to 16. Celebrate the festival of the unleavened bread. For 7 days eat bread made without a yeast, as I commanded you. Do this at the appointed time in the month of Aviv, for in that month you came out of Egypt. No one is to appear before me empty-handed. There's more about that in Leviticus, and we'll get to that pretty soon. He's saying, okay, 3 times a year I want you to celebrate a festival for me. Worshiping our Lord is a festival of gratitude. It is a festival with much thanksgiving and joy. And he says the first one that you're going to celebrate is Passover and the unleavened bread. If you'll remember, Passover was on the 15th of Adar. And it was a day when they prepared to sacrifice a lamb, take the blood and put it across the doorpost. And it's called Passover because the angel of death went over each household that night. And if the lintels of the door was not painted, the oldest firstborn in that house would die. And we are to celebrate. He's telling the Jews, you're going to celebrate that Passover yearly. It is followed by 7 days of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Unleavened means no yeast. Yeast grows and grows, kind of like sin in our life. If we accept sin in our life, sooner or later it gets more and more. You tolerate more and more. I look at what we have tolerated on television. I remember as a child, there was so many things that was not allowed to be shown on television. And slowly and surely, little things creeped in and we became tolerant of it. And those little things grew and grew until now there are some things on television that is pure filth. You and I both know that. And that's what God is saying. He said, I don't want anything with yeast. Yeast symbolizing sin. He said, but you're to come during the time of Passover and have a festival to me. And no one is to appear empty-handed. This is going to require a sacrifice of love, a sacrifice in blood for the Passover. In verse 16, he says, we're going to celebrate the festival of harvest with the first fruits of the crops you sow in your field. Celebrate the festival of ingathering, that's the third one, at Pentecost, at the end of the year when you gather in your crops from the field. The first fruits, when is the first fruits? The first fruits is shortly after the time when spring has sprung and Passover has come and the unleavened bread has come, and about just a few days after that they have first fruits. First fruits is celebrated by going out to your grain into your vineyards, and you select the very first ripened, best looking crops that you have, and you take them to the temple, or you offer them on the sacrifice to God to say thank you. And then at Pentecost, the last one is a harvest festival. It's an ingathering. It's when you bring in the harvest, and it is 50 days after first fruits. You would see, Pentecost happens usually in September, about mid-September in our calendar. Verse 17, 3 times a year all the men are to appear before the sovereign Lord. Do not offer the blood of a sacrifice to me along with anything containing yeast. The fat of my festival offering must not be kept until morning. Don't hold back, give the best. And he said, bring the best of your first fruits of your soil to the house of the Lord your God. He is telling them that each festival requires a sacrifice. Some are grain sacrifices and some are animal sacrifices. These are thanksgiving sacrifices. These are thankfulness. When they offer that kind of sacrifice, the animal, I'm going to use for an example, a lamb. They take it to the priest who makes sure it's a spotless lamb. The animal is butchered. The inward parts, the liver, the kidneys, the heart, all of those, and the fat of that lamb is put on the altar and it's burnt. And the smoke is counted as a sweet savor to God. It's his way of sharing that with you. The meal then, the animal carcass that is left, cut in half, and half of it goes to the priest and half of it goes back to the person who brought it. And that's to celebrate, to be able to have a meal, to celebrate the Lord. Or in the priest's case, it took care of their living and taking care of them. And he said, the fat of my festival offering must not be kept until morning. In other words, when it's the freshest, it's when it's the best, and it's to be burnt. In verse 19, he says, bring the best of the first fruits of the soil to the house of the Lord your God. Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. I wondered why this was in there. This seems so strange. I mean, it's something that I definitely wouldn't do. Have no opportunity to do. Wouldn't be understanding of this. But upon reading about it, there were cultures around them that didn't believe in the one true God. And as part of their fertility ritual, they would take a young goat and they would boil it in its mother's milk. Then they would scrunch it up, and then they would put it in a strainer, and the fluid that they received, that's what they put on their crops as fertilizer, and it's a part of their fertility act. God said, you've seen this done. They probably even saw it practiced quite a bit in Egypt. He said, I'm telling you right now, I will not accept that. Do not do that. And this is where your Jews come with their belief in keeping kosher kitchens, keeping milk and dairy separated. I think this is a real reach for them, but that's what they think, and that's how they have interpreted it. They think you could accidentally eat some meat and then have a glass of milk, And unbeknownst to you, it could be the milk of the mother of the veal that you ate or the lamb that you ate, and in your stomach they're churning together, and so you broke this commandment. So that's what started them having the separation of dairy and some of their kosher laws and the way they eat. I love the next few verses. God's angel to prepare the way. I want you, as I read this to you, I want you to listen to the way he describes the angel and see what you think. In verse 20, 21 and 22, God says, "See, I am sending an angel ahead of you to guard you along the way and to bring you to the place that I have prepared." What has been leading them? They're camped right now at the foot of Mount Sinai. What has been leading them across this desert? What led them by day? What led them by night? A cloud led them by day, and a pillar of fire led them by night. And he is saying, I'm sending an angel ahead of you to guard you along the way and to bring you or to lead you to the place I have prepared. Pay attention to him and listen to what he says. Do not rebel against him. He will not forgive your rebellion, since my name is in him. Pay attention to him and listen to him. Who is this angel? This angel has the power to forgive. God says he's not going to forgive, which gives the impression that he had the power, but he's not going to use it. And God says, my name is in him. A lot of commentators share that they believe this is a pre-incarnate Jesus Christ. This is the warrior that is leading the children of Israel at this time. There is a story in Joshua about Joshua going to battle, and there is a great warrior there that he recognizes is from God, or he thinks is from God. And he asks the warrior, he said, are you going to fight for us, or are you going to fight for them? And the warrior said, no. Strange thing to answer. Then he clarified, and he said, I am for the Lord. I don't fight for you. I fight for the Lord. In verse 22 it says, if you listen carefully to what he says and do all that I say, I will be an enemy to your enemies, and I will oppose those who oppose you. Listen to all the wonderful things that God is offering Israel if they keep their word and follow this covenant. My angel will go ahead of you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, and Jebusites, and I will wipe them out. Now God is telling them all the benefits of keeping the covenant. In 24, 25, and 26, do not bow down before their gods. Whose gods? The Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, and Jebusites, the other people around them. Do not worship them or follow their practices. You must demolish them and break their sacred stones to pieces. Worship the Lord your God, and his blessing will be on, listen now, all these blessings, and his blessing will be on your food and water. I will take away sickness from among you. None will miscarry or be barren in your land, and I will give you a full lifespan. He says, follow my angel. Follow what I've told you in these laws and in these rules, and the benefits will be a long life, a very profitable life. Your women will not suffer from miscarriages or from being barren. What a wonderful land it would be if you obey. Then in verse 27, he says, I will send my terror ahead of you and throw into confusion every nation you encounter, and I will make all your enemies turn their backs and run. I will send the hornet ahead of you to drive the Hittites, the Canaanites, and the Hivites out of your way. I love this verse. It says, I will send my terror. He said, I will put the fear of me, the fear of you, in your enemies' hearts, and they will run away. When it so happened that Joshua sent 2 spies into Jericho, and they came across Rahab. Rahab said, these people are scared to death of you. They are terrified of you. Your fame has already preceded you. That's God keeping his promise. And there's another place, if you'll go to Joshua 24:12, where it talks about God infested one set of their enemies with hornets, and it drove them away. God keeps his word. In verse 29 and 30, God says, but I'm not going to drive them out in a single year, because the land would become desolate and the wild animals too numerous for you. Little by little I'll drive them out before you until you have increased enough to take possession of the land. In these 2 verses, he's saying this is going to be a process for you to take the land that I've promised you. It's not going to be overnight. You're not going to march straight in there and it fall into your hands. I'm going to give it to you a little bit at a time as you grow, as you learn to manage the land, as you learn to manage each other, as you learn more of me. I'll drive them out. You'll have it all, but it's going to take some time. We're not going to rush this. You didn't, the first 10 minutes that you had a bicycle, more than likely you didn't learn how to ride it right away. When you were first married, you probably faltered a little bit when it came to all the chores in the house that your mom or dad did that now falls on your shoulders. You had to stop and think and grow into these things. And he says, you're going to have to grow into a nation before you can be responsible as a nation will be. And I'm going to be there. And I'm going to help you. And I'm going to sustain you. In verse 31, I will establish your borders from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, and from the desert to the Euphrates River. I will give unto you in your hands the people who live in the land, and you're going to drive them out before you. Do you know what he just promised them in this verse? 300,000 square miles of land. At the height of Israel during Solomon's reign, the most land that Israel ever governed was 30,000. That's only 10% of what God promised them. God's promises come true. So when are they going to get the rest of that? Read Revelation. He's going to give it to them then. God continues. He said, you can't leave this in. You can't leave the people that are already here, that are already worshiping idols, that are already pagan. You cannot leave them here. You must drive them out. This is the way land was granted. This is a land, that way that God gave land then and took land. These people have all been given opportunities and chances to become God's people, and they all turned around and wouldn't. And their sins have reached a point where God is judging them. And he says, do not make a covenant with them or with their gods, little g. Do you see how he is really stressing? You have got to stay away from their gods. You have got to stay away from their idols. You can't be exposed to them and stay true and stay pure to me. Mom used to have a bowl of fruit on the table, and every once in a while, if we weren't eating it as fast as she wanted us to, she would go through it and check to see were there any rotten spots in it. And if there was a piece of fruit with a rotten spot, she would take it out of the bowl. She would not leave it in the bowl to contaminate the rest of the bowl, because that rot would spread. That's exactly what God's doing. In verse 33, it says, do not live in your land. Drive them out, or they will cause you to sin against me, because the worship of their gods will certainly be a snare to you. Looking back through our Bible, we can see where Israel many times became worshipers of idols and how it really did do them damage. You know, we know from our Bible that they didn't heed these warnings. Idolatry was easy for them to fall into. Idolatry is easy for us to fall into. What is an idol? Well, it's anything that you put more importance on it than you do on your God. Anything. You set aside time to worship and read your Bible study, and you let something little pull you away from that time, something unimportant. You have to spend time with God and Him alone. Don't let anything steal that time. That can happen. It happens to a lot of us at different and sundry times in our lives, but we've got to be aware and worship God alone. Next week, we do chapter 24. Have a good week.